let's start, Gerry, with your name and when we're doing this.
Yeah, Gerry Morris, and this is the 23rd of June, 2017.
And where are we?
We're in San Antonio at the Hyatt.
And what's special about today?
Well, I was inducted into the TCDLA Hall of Fame.
And congratulations. We're going to spend time here today to record for posterity the important aspects of your life and career. And I'd like to start with just the basics. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in East Texas. I was born in Gilmer, and then we moved to a little community. It wasn't an incorporated town called Owentown. And what it was Camp Phantom, was World War II Army base. It was abandoned or closed after World War II. Somebody came in and bought all the facilities there and built some homes there. And my dad built a home there.
Where in Texas is that located?
It's about 10 miles north of Tyler.
And how old were you when you got there?
I was 2 years old.
Did you stay there until your graduation from high school?
Well, we lived in one house a year. We moved across the street to another one where we lived 6 years, and we moved across the street to another one where I lived till I left home.
Tell me about the schools.
I went to school 12 years in the same building. There was a dividing hall between the high school and the junior high and grade school. And we'd sneak over to the high school side until they started beating us up, and then we'd go back to the grade school side.
How many were in your class?
35 graduated in my graduating class, and in my sister's class, who was 3 years older than me, there were 16. And the difference was, my senior year in high school, we integrated. There had been a black high school there that was closed, and the two were merged. So that's why we had twice as many in my class as I had in her.
So what year did that integration merger take place?
School year was 69-70.
How did that go?
That whole era was so tumultuous. Texas has such a varied culture. I don't know if you're not from East Texas, you may not know that East Texas is really Old South culture. I worked on a ranch when I was in high school that the main house where the foreman lived had been a plantation home, and that was like 10 miles from my house. It was like the culture was like Alabama or Mississippi or anywhere else. So segregation was very, very strongly rooted in that area. And for a while we had school choice, which was half-ass attempt to comply with desegregation. And we had a handful of black students come to my high school, maybe starting when I was a sophomore. And lo and behold, those people who'd never been around black people before started to realize there's something wrong with the system that keeps us separated, because there's, it sounds trite to say, but gee, there's no difference. These are people just like us with families and hopes and dreams, and then by the time we integrated fully, the students were fine with it, but it was a big deal in the community. This is the forebearer of the apocalypse here. We have black people and white people, kids going to school together. I don't know what's going to happen.
That culture of segregation and the civil rights movement that was happening in your formative years, were you paying much attention to that when you were young?
I paid a lot of attention to it. I was thinking back when I was getting ready to do the little talk I did at the induction ceremony about where it was that I first started sort of feeling the urge that we feel as criminal defense lawyers. And I think probably if we get deep enough into the genome, at some point we're going to figure out it's genetic. That there's a gene there somewhere that makes us look at things like we do. But I can remember the little town we lived in, there were some manufacturing companies that were in some of the old barracks from Camp Phantom was the name of the base. And
What was the name of the little town?
Owen Town. And those people, of course, had to eat lunch, and my uncle and aunt moved to that little town. They bought a cafe, and my dad built them a little apartment that hooked onto the cafe. My sister actually started working there when she was 14, started working for tips, waiting tables. And I'd go sit in the, my dad ran a service station, and there were a lot of people who worked for him who were of color over the years, and they were always very nice to me, and I became friends with the people that worked for him. And then we'd go eat in my uncle's cafe, and I'd go in one door, but they couldn't go in with me. They had to go in this door that had colored them. And we went into a place where I would eat, and there were booths with upholstery, and there was a jukebox and the bright colors and everything. To me, it just seemed like a really special place. I always wondered what went on in that other place. And so I can remember, I must have been 8 or 9. Well, it was before the Civil, it was 1964, so I would have been a little older than that. Because the Civil Rights Act had been passed, and everybody was sort of waiting for it to go into effect. And I remember one Sunday slipping down out of my aunt and uncle's apartment into their restaurant, so I could go through the kitchen and go back to where the colored people, as people called them then, ate. I remember going in and seeing this real stark wooden benches and this real drab, kind of olive drab almost, paint on the walls, and it had nothing like the place where the other people ate. And my dad was a very, very smart individual, knew about a lot of things, and was very worldly in World War II, and went overseas. And so I saw that, and I remember going back and asking him, Dad, why do colored people have to go to that place? And why is it like ours? And he didn't have an answer. And for my dad not to have an answer was pretty profound. And I think that was the first time that I felt kind of a gut level pain of injustice, if you will. Just realizing that what that was all about is that we had this structure that people believed in and supported, and we had elections over, and we fought a war over at one point. And the structure was to relegate people to lesser status, give them lesser opportunity, lesser amenities, simply because they were colored. And that made a profound impression on me. And then with the Civil Rights Movement coming up, and I was still very young. I was, I guess, 11 or 12 when I did that. And then as the Civil Rights movement progressed, there was the killing of the 3 civil rights workers in Mississippi. And I started to pay attention to what was going on, and then Martin Luther King became prominent. And I remember seeing what he was doing on television, and of course in the community I was in, he was just hated. It was just vitriolic hate. And I remember thinking, superficially, unfortunately, I kind of bought into it. Yeah, that's bad. But then I start watching the man, and I realized how courageous he was, how absolutely fearless he had to be to do what he did, and how much he must have believed in what he was doing. And that made an impression on me. And I started sort of working through all this cultural pressure to sort of speak the company line and sort of go along with, well, there is something different here. We need segregation. Just realizing, no, this is not right. This is fundamentally not right. And then, of course, the overlay on that, the Vietnam War and the protests that were going on with that. And it was just a wonderful time, looking back on it, to be young, to be intellectually engaged with all that, and to start to understand what that cultural revolution was about. It was throwing off the old, and the old primarily was the Jim Crow South and the thinking, the segregationist thinking, and it happened so fast. And you go back and look at the Civil Rights Act of '63 and the '64, and then you look at Martin Luther King's death, which I think was '68, I believe. And that's a period of 4 years. And you think of the tremendous transformation that we underwent in that 4 years. And I was just intoxicated by it. I was influenced by it. My sister was very much influenced by it, and I think that was the reason we both became lawyers, because we wanted to be in a position to do something about that. And we both thought that the best way to do something about that was to get involved in practice of law and take on the cases that would make a difference in that. And it's really a profound time to be young.
Have there been anybody in your family on either side who've been an attorney before?
No. In fact, the first lawyer that I ever met was my first law professor, the first day I went to law school. I had no idea what a lawyer really did. I'd seen him on television, and that was about it. But yeah, I didn't know anything about really what the practice of law involved.
Did you have a sense that any of your other classmates or people you grew up with in Owen Town shared yours and your sister's concerns about these issues?
Yes, there were some. There was just a very few, and it was a very divisive thing, as you can imagine. You were either on one side of it or the other. There wasn't any gray area. Either you were sort of the old culture or you were the new culture. And so I didn't take away many friends from that era.
What role did your parents play, if any, in your thinking on these subjects of integration in the law and justice?
My dad had a wonderful, rich childhood. He grew up on a farm. He had 7 brothers and sisters.
What was his name?
His name was Gerry Morris, and he was 40. He's mid-40s when I was born. He was born in 1910, so he lived in East Texas and lived on that farm until he was 22, 23. So you get the idea of the time span. And if you think about it, look at the timeline. That was what, 35, 40, 45 years after the Civil War that he was born. And the culture was still very much Old South, and they had basically sharecroppers on their place. His father was very in the small pool that he swam in, a pretty big fish. He was a very successful farmer, and my father grew up playing with the kids of those sharecroppers, and grew up with them being treated as equals among the kids. And then as they grew up, he learned that there came a point where they didn't have the same opportunities he did, and it really bothered him. And he talked about that a lot. He volunteered for the Army at Pearl Harbor, and one of his best friends was the son of one of the sharecroppers. His name was Cat. I never knew his last name. And Cat wanted to join the Army and he couldn't. And that made a really big impression on my dad. And I can remember hearing my dad as a young boy talking about segregation and how wrong it was, and how starting out growing up with people of color, and then learning later that the law treated them different, society commanded different things for them, how confusing that was to him, because he judged them growing up just like we judged our friends growing up. There was some friends that tell you the truth that you could rely on. There were some that you couldn't. There were some that had your back, some that didn't. And that wasn't based on their color. It was based on their character, their moral phrase.
What was your mother's attitude about all this?
Mother
What was
was
her name? Her name and full name?
Hazel Johnson was her name. Mother wasn't as strident about it as my father was. He was he would get very angry, you know, with people who talked segregation stuff or racist stuff. My mother was more passive in that, but she certainly felt the inequity of it and agreed with it. She was certainly not a segregationist or racist.
Did she work outside the home?
Yeah, she was a registered nurse. Both my parents grew up during the Depression, which anybody that has parents that had that experience knows that makes a profound impression on them. And my mother went to nursing school at a time when you actually got paid. Well, at a certain point, you started getting paid. In nursing school, you did, I guess, the equivalent of residency for doctors. And she was supporting her parents with that money, because that was during the latter years of the Depression. You know, they needed her help. And the thing about my mother that really was had a profound effect on my sister and me both was that she was probably the most honest person that I have ever met. Even telling a story, she wouldn't put any embellishment on it to make it a better story. She was just absolutely committed to telling you the honest truth, whether it served her or not.
Now, you had one sister,
Right.
and her name,
Is Margaret Hussey now. She's married to Larry Hussey.
and she's how much older than you?
She's 3 years, and 3 years in a month.
And where did you, after high school, go to college?
I started out at Tyler Junior College for no other reason than the junior college had a district, taxation district, which we lived in. And I think my tuition per semester was $60. And it was a very well respected junior college. I lived at home the first year, I guess, and moved away. Just because of circumstances, I was self-sufficient from the time I was 15 or so. So what I did was based a lot of what I could afford, and it certainly wasn't that I had some aspiration that I was denied. That was fine with me. Staying at home, going to school, saving some money for the next step. Actually, jobs were pretty good back then for somebody wanting to work, so I was able to save some money, move away from home. I was very anxious to get out on my own, and then I went to Stephen F. Austin and Nacogdoches after that.
What kind of jobs would you have at that stage of your life?
Well, let me list them. I think my first job, other than working for my dad in the service station, which was slave labor, was I drove a truck. I delivered eggs to VA hospitals. Did that for a while. I sacked groceries at a local grocery store. And I did that until I turned 16 because the other two didn't care about child labor laws. The place I wanted to work did. And that was H.L. Hunt's Ranch, which, as I said a while ago, was 10 miles from my house. And the good thing about that was they would let you work as many hours as you wanted to. You know, that was the good news. Bad news was it paid you $1.15 an hour. But, you know, the culture that I grew up in, if you didn't work from the time you could, there was something wrong with you. Because most of the families that I knew, most of the kids that I was in school with, worked to support their family. It was just, you know, I look back at it and I think, well, those families didn't have a lot. And if they could get a kid that worked after school and earned, you know, $20 a week, that was tremendous help. And I was just supporting myself, so I really had good. But if you didn't work, you know, you were looked down upon.
When you started at Tyler Junior College and then moved over to Stephen F. Austin, were you focusing even then on going to law school?
You know, I really, coming out of high school, I was kind of in a little bit of turmoil, and I didn't know what to do, and I had a lot of different interests. I was pretty good in science and math, and so some of those things interested me, and then so I was trying to figure out what to do, and the Vietnam War was going on, so that was a big incentive to at least get to school while you're doing the figuring out. So I started out in engineering, and frankly, I was more of an idea man than a practical person. I didn't study that hard, and engineering required that, and I didn't like it anyway. And so probably about the second year I was in junior college, I went to what really was my love, and that was I decided to be a lawyer. And I got into CNF Austin the summer following my graduation from junior college, went straight through and graduated a year and a half, CNF Austin, so I was in college 3.5 years total.
And then how did you select your law school?
Well, going back to not knowing anything about lawyers, I thought University of Texas sounds good. They got a really good football team, and that was attractive to me. And so Texas Tech Law School was just starting up. They'd have one class by then, and then there was Baylor, and Texas Tech and Texas were state schools, which meant that tuition was dirt cheap back then. I think the most I ever paid for tuition at UT Law School was $200 a semester. And and I didn't really know how I was going to pay for Baylor if that's the only one I got into, but I applied anyway, just kind of hedged my bets. So I applied at Texas and Texas Tech, and I thought, I could afford both of those, and they're both in Texas. And I got accepted at Texas Tech almost by return of mail. And I took the LSAT. I didn't have enough sense to take a review course. I took it cold, and I didn't know how that stacked up. And fortunately, I made the cutoff, and I got accepted at Texas. And when I got there, when they were first day of law school, they were telling us what the dean scores were and all that, and I realized I just barely got in. That it was really a stupid thing to do, not take a review course and not prepare at all. But that was the level of planning I did back at that stage of my life.
How was the 3 years at University of Texas Law School?
When I got to law school, it was a whole new world for me. I wasn't a great law student. I was pretty good, but the intellectual challenge, living in Austin in 1974 through and on, was just the best place to be for somebody my age and with my interest, and I just loved it. I can't say every minute, but certainly most minutes I was in law school. Best time of my life, academically. And I met wonderful friends, some of which I'm still friends with today. And that was the first time I've been out of the East Texas culture. And I realized, first of all, there was a lot more of the world in East Texas. And secondly, that thank goodness not everybody thought like the people I've been around in East Texas. And I really loved it.
What was your favorite class in law school?
Gosh. It's kind of interesting. Some of my favorite class, believe it or not, was federal civil procedure because of the professor that taught it, Bernie Ward. He was a charming man that quoted Shakespeare in class and talked about the great artists and classical musicians, and was just an engaging fellow. And again, it was sort of the same thing. I never seen anybody like that. I never seen anybody with that broad of interest who knew that much and who presented that well. And I just really loved taking his class. But then, I of course like criminal law classes. I got involved in some trial competitions. I really enjoyed that. Took a seminar with Frank Maloney. It was a very practical seminar. We actually would take what I later found out were some of his cases and that he past cases, and we would work those up as if they were our cases. And I really enjoyed that.
And who was Frank Maloney?
Frank Maloney was the first president of Texas Criminal Defense Lawyers Association. When I started practicing law, he was one of 2 or 3 lawyers in Austin that everybody revered. He's, just was a titan in the legal profession. Very intimidating guy. One of the prosecutors used to call him Colonel Clink. He had a shaved head, and he had been injured in the Korean War and had lost an eye, and sometimes would wear a patch, but was very, very imposing figure.
Had an accent too, didn't he?
He had a Boston accent. He grew up in the Northeast, and that was very, let's say, special in Central Texas. But it just added to the mystique.
At that time, who were the other lawyers while you were in law school that kind of legends or lawyers you looked up to as role models, perhaps?
Yeah, at that point, I didn't know enough to have role models. There were lawyers that were spectacular and very successful, and I thought, I certainly want to be that, and I want to be revered like them. But I can remember watching Roy Minton try cases when I was in law school. He had a particular style, very folksy style, very engaging, that I thought was very, very good. And I remember actually had a friend in law school, kind of a casual acquaintance with somebody that I'd run around with socially. The guy indicted for rape, as they called it back then, and Warren Burdett represented him.
That was the Robert Campbell case,
Yeah,
right?
right.
Did you watch that trial?
I watched some of it. Didn't get a chance to watch much of it, but I knew Robert, and then Robert was acquitted, and then Robert told me a lot about it. And then other people told me a lot about it. And Warren Burdett was just a unique individual. There'll never be another one. One of the more engaging, charismatic lawyers that I think we've ever had. Just a real spellbinder.
Did you select criminal law as your focus in law school, or did you just happen to fall into it? How did that work?
From the day that I decided I was going to be a lawyer, I never wanted to be anything other than a criminal defense lawyer. I did apply for a couple of prosecutors' jobs, and I remember interviewing at the Dallas DA's office and made it all the way up to interviewing with Henry Wade, and Mr. Wade and I didn't get along. It was pretty obvious during the interview. And then I applied at the Harris County DA's office, and I made it through a couple of cuts there, and I was supposed to go for an interview, and had one scheduled, and they canceled that because the prosecutor was in trial, and set another one, same thing happened. I remember literally being about to walk out the door of the law office of the place where I was clerking, and the phone rang, and it was the Harris County DA's office canceling the interview again. And I just said, I'm done. I'm hanging out a shingle. I'm going to start taking court appointments. I'm going to be a criminal defense lawyer.
Now, did you clerk for a lawyer or work in a law office while you were in law school?
I did. I worked for Gerry Howarth, who people around Austin know very well. And Gerry and I were great friends. And he, as some people say, that the pay was bad, but the hours were long. It was it was a wonderful experience. Gerry had a very unique way of practicing law, which I think was wonderful. He taught me a lot about being a detailed person and about the intimidation factor that comes with knowing more about the facts of the law than anybody else in the courtroom.
So how did you get your practice off the ground, just going out and hanging out the shingle?
Back then, the court appointment system in Austin, we had a system where everyone that was arrested the night before would be brought into the Justice of the Peace Court there in the courthouse, and it was first come, first served. You'd sign up for the appointments, and you could get there when the courthouse opened, which was 8 o'clock, sign the list, and then go have breakfast and come back and be back there by 9 when the docket call happened. And they bring the people in, ask them if they needed a lawyer. If they didn't, they appointed the next one in the jury box. We all sit in the jury box. And I started representing people without means, and I still remember vividly my first case. I call it the Great Fried Chicken Heist. There were, at the time, there was a Church's Fried Chicken on the drag. If you know anything about Austin, you know what the drag is. And it was there at 26th Street in Guadalupe. And somebody broke the drive-through window, reached in and grabbed a package of rolls and a big jar of jalapenos. And so they sent somebody out to investigate, and the detective took a look at it and decided what he needed to do was line all the street people up that sleep there in Guadalupe. So he lined them all up and went down the line, and he arrested my client because, as he testified at the examining trial, my client had a strong smell of jalapenos on his breath. And so we set that for an examining trial, and that was a testimony. Of course, the guy was cut loose. There was no probable cause, there were no fingerprints, but never will forget that.
Well, you mentioned that hearing is an examining trial, which is not a procedure that is in existence much anymore. What was that exactly back then?
Well, it was back in the last days of buggy whips, I think. They went out about the same time, but there's a provision in the Code of Criminal Procedure that allows you to ask for an examining trial prior to indictment. It's held before a magistrate, and the magistrate basically tests probable cause to determine whether to hold the person. The person is arrested, a warrant, or something occurring in the officer's presence, and you basically have a little mini trial. And back when we were having those, they were very useful because the justice of the peace would rule on whether there was probable cause or not. And we had some good justices of the peace. And I told the DA's office, if I can't make probable cause, there's no reason for me to indict this case and go forward with it. So we really loaded up on those hearings. And at the time, they were very personnel intensive for the DA's office. They even deputized some county attorneys, assistant county attorneys, to handle them. And it just got overwhelming to them, and the way that you cut that right off is to indict. So eventually they became basically a motion for a speedy indictment if you set something for an examining trial. But I had many cases that would end at the examining trial.
Do you remember your first hired client?
Yeah, I do.
Is it something you can talk about? Or?
Yeah. It's a guy that burglarized the all-you-can-eat catfish place out on 71. And
kind of getting a food thing in
yeah,
this case here.
right. And we ended up entering a plea for probation. They caught him in the store with his cohort. So the facts weren't in our favor on that, let's say. And so we put together a good guy package and showed that it was a one-off thing for him. And frankly, we may have even gotten it reduced to criminal trespass or something. I don't remember that, but I can remember an 18-year-old kid that did something stupid.
As best you can remember, how long did it take you to develop a paying practice, just starting from scratch?
Well, I always turned a profit from day one. I also did divorces. I had sold real estate when I was in law school, so I had some familiarity with all that, and I actually did real estate closings. And so, but I eventually moved into criminal defense exclusively when I got to the point where I could support myself doing that. But I'd say probably 3 to 4 years I was off and running pretty good.
Now, most lawyers, criminal defense lawyers, restrict their practice to state courts, but you licensed in federal court pretty early, is that right?
Pretty much the day I could. There was a 1-year waiting period.
And why was that?
That was where the big leagues played. I wanted, as they say, I wanted to go to the show. I wanted to take on the challenge of trying federal cases, and I knew the quality of litigation there was top notch. The judges were top notch, and it was something that I wanted to see if I could do. I wanted to push myself.
One of the, fairly early on in your career, one of the really big cases you got into was one of the most notorious cases in the history of Texas trials, and that was the Branch Davidian case that occurred up in Waco. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what the case was about, and then how you got involved and what it was like in the trial?
Well, what the case was about is there was an offshoot of the Seventh-day Adventist Church called the Branch Davidians, and it's been way too long ago for me to remember how that name was assigned to them. But they were what people would refer to as a fundamentalist sect. They believed that there was a prophet that led them that was basically God spoke through. And there was, from time to time, there would be two people that would disagree on whether they were the prophet or not, and there would be a battle. And one of those battles came about, and a fellow named David Koresh, I don't remember his real name, that was the name he took, won the battle. And it was literally a battle. It was some shooting, and it was pretty interesting. But they had I hate to use the word compound because that doesn't adequately characterize it. They had a communal home, let's say, outside of Waco. And they were self-reliant. Some of them actually worked in the community. The people that were a member of the Branch Davidians, one fellow that went to trial with us had a PhD in chemistry. The sort of number two guy in charge had an MBA. Some of the people were very educated and had very successful careers. David Koresh, I can remember talking to the fellow that had the PhD and saying, well, when did you first know that David Koresh was the prophet? So I saw him painting the side of the wall on the communal home, and I heard him talking to God. And it was a two-way conversation. He was answering God, and you could tell that God was responding to him. Now, most of us would think that was a sign of auditory hallucinations. He took that to mean that David was the prophet. And so Koresh got involved and became prophet, the leader of this group. And he had a real apocalyptic vision. He began to believe that the government was going to come after them, and that was going to be some part fulfilling the book of Revelations. There was going to be a great battle, Armageddon, and so forth. And of course, it was a self-fulfilling prophecy because what he did was begin to arm this group. They, through various means, acquired a bunch of weapons, primarily AR-15s, some submachine guns, 50 calibers, and some explosives, and a host of other weapons. And make a very long story short, a package fell off the back of a FedEx delivery truck one day, and it busted open. It was full of inert hand grenades. And what they were doing with those is they would take the shells, the inert hand grenades, and pack them with powder and a makeshift trigger and convert them into live hand grenades. So ATF decided that the thing to do, the way to deal with these folks, was to drive 100-something up in front and basically have a forceful raid. They had an undercover officer who had dealt with these individuals, had actually been inside their communal home, done some of their services. David Koresh spotted him almost immediately. He was undercover, and that fed into, the apocalypse is about to come. So again, skipping through a lot of details, on the morning of the raid, they staged the raid about 10 miles away or so, and somebody figured out what was going on. Somebody from inside was outside, figured out what was going on, went and told Koresh that they're coming. And Koresh sent the undercover agent away, so they're coming, you go now, no hard feelings, basically. So he comes out and tells them all, look, they know you're coming. This relied on the element of surprise. There is no more element of surprise, don't come. Well, of course, they all had their suits on and looking good, and they had all drilled on this and were ready for it. And they said, that's all right, we'll just go in anyway. So the story varies here as to exactly what happened, but what we know happened is several cattle trailers full of ATF agents pull up in front of their communal home, hop out, and shots start being fired. 4 ATF agents died. And a siege goes on for some months, ends up basically with the place catching on fire, a lot of people dying in the fire. I think 11 people were prosecuted. The way that I got involved was initially there were people from TCLA lawyers. Dick DeGarrett was the mover and shaker. He represented David Koresh, and he'd actually gone in during the siege and talked with him. He started arranging lawyers for everybody who was inside, and there was 90 something. So every lawyer in the state just about that he knew got a client. I got one. April 19th, I believe it was, when the fire occurred, my client burned to death. So I thought, well, I'm done. And then a couple months later, I get a call from Tim Evans, who said, would you consider representing one of the fellows that's indicted? And of course it was yes, I would. And I had a partner at the time, and we talked about it, and he agreed that he would keep the practice going while I did that. And I still remember I didn't know my client, of course, and I was thinking, well, how am I going to convince this fellow to let me represent him? He doesn't know me. I'm fairly young compared to these other lawyers. What can I tell him to convince him that I can represent him? And I later found out that he was sitting in jail saying, what can I tell this lawyer that's going to make him want to represent me? How do I present myself? How can I persuade him to represent me? So we ended up with me walking in and saying, hi, I'm Gerry Morris. I'd like to represent you. And he said, okay. and
this would be all pro bono?
All pro bono, yeah. And yeah, it was just, was the best experience of my professional life. Working with the lawyers that I worked with was tremendous, but the subject matter, the importance of the case, and it was everything that we go into the criminal defense for, overbearing government. There was no reason for them to conduct a raid like that. David Koresh frequently left that communal home. They could arrest him outside. There's no reason for the bloodshed. It was just simply, we're going to go in there and we're going to kick their ass because they're not like us.
Y'all ended up in a long trial on that, didn't you?
Yeah.
How long did it last?
Oh, 4+ weeks, and then of course
in federal court.
It was moved to San Antonio, and the judge said we filed a motion to change the venue, and he took judicial notice that incident had gotten more publicity in Waco than anything since the Vietnam War. So he granted the motion to change the venue. So I came down here and lived for about 6 weeks. Made a deal with someone that ran a bed and breakfast. They gave me a room for like $35 a week, and then several other lawyers had similar deals. The community here was very supportive.
And your client's case turned out how?
My client was acquitted of all the charges. Walked out of the courtroom. I have a picture of me and him and his wife at the Fairmont Hotel with him drinking the first alcoholic beverage he'd ever drank in his life. He was 64.
At that point, your career as a criminal defense lawyer was really taking off?
Yeah.
An accurate description?
It was, and there had been one case I tried before that I really want to mention because this was kind of a watershed for me, not so much professionally, but just not in terms of getting business, but understanding what it's all about. Is I got appointed to a fellow that was charged with tax evasion. He was indicted in Austin. He was a merchant marine. He had filed his tax return when he was in port in New Orleans. And back then, if you mailed a tax return from New Orleans, it went to Austin's processing center, and that was venue. But he was from New York City, from New York City. And all the witnesses that we needed were in New York. at that particular time, we didn't have a sitting federal judge in Austin. And Judge Sessions was coming in and handling the docket, and several other judges were. So I filed a motion to transfer the case to New York, and Judge Sessions granted it, just almost by return of mail. So, all of a sudden, been practiced 5 years, I'm on my way to Southern District of New York to try a tax evasion case in Lower Manhattan. And I tried it and got not guilty. And I think during that trial was the first time I realized that it would be very possible for me to get in over my head, and that I really needed to redouble my efforts, to learn what I was doing, to go to these seminars, to talk to lawyers, to listen to what they had to say, and really start working on my craft. And probably the thing that I remember the most about that case is, I go to Manhattan and I'm trying a case. I've got a Texas accent, and I'm walking around introducing myself to all the court personnel, the bailiff, a guy named Mickey Mahoney, who's about as Irish as you can get, and court clerk, and actually went back and met with the judge because I had to get admitted prior to reaching him. And they became amazed at how polite I was and how gracious I was toward them. And they would comment about it. And I would say, look, I don't know exactly what you mean. This is the way we conduct ourselves in Texas. And they expected me to roll in with 6 years or something. And so I tried the case, and it'd take too long to tell you about the case, but there was a moment in the case that was very dramatic. And it was very, the judge actually had to stop the trial and let the jurors go back in the jury room and cry. We had that emotional of a moment. And it's probably a pretty good story. You're probably wondering how that could happen in a tax evasion case, but it did. And so the jury acquitted him, and I didn't know anything about Manhattan. I was staying at 64th in Lexington, and the courthouse was about on 2nd Street. So I rode the subway every morning to court. And the jury came back about 4 o'clock, and I knew I had to get on the subway or get back, or it'd be 8 o'clock before I got back to the hotel. So I, shook everybody's hand, and I lit out to the subway. 10 of the jurors followed me to the subway and rode back to my hotel room with me because they wanted to talk to me about the case and just, as we say back home, visit with me about it. And I never will forget that. It was just a wonderful experience.
So how did you deal with this issue of needing to enlarge your skills and make available to yourself more information about how to become the lawyer you were wanting to become?
I figured out early on that what I needed to do was to watch really good lawyers. And I don't mean perhaps the ones that you saw on television or the ones that were pronouncing themselves to be the best lawyers, but the ones that when I would talk to other people, they would say, this guy or this woman is the real deal. And I just sort of injected myself at TCLA into the circles of those lawyers. And I started watching them, and fortunately ended up trying some cases with some of them. And started doing a lot of CLE speaking, which was kind of interesting because I didn't really know that much about what I was doing. But at that time, I would limit it to law talks. And you don't have to be all that experienced to research the law and talk about it. And but I began to one thing that that really started to dawn on me is I got over, hopefully quickly enough, this idea that I had to be like somebody, that the way to try a case was to, for instance, be like Roy Minton, and pick him out for any particular reason, or to be like Frank Maloney, or to be like you name it. That if I was going to be a good trial lawyer, and by that I mean someone who represented my client well in trial, that I had to develop a style that I was comfortable with. that it had to be me, because the best thing that I think the lawyer can have going for them is to be genuine, is to present the story from the heart, and where the jury doesn't look at it with a jaundiced eye as well. I don't know about this guy. He sounds a little phony to me. You got to find the story that you're going to tell and tell it within yourself. And I saw a lot of lawyers that could do that. And when I tried the Branch Davidian case, I tried that with some very good lawyers, Doug Tinker, who I didn't know until very well. We tried the case, and we became great friends. And Tim Evans, who had been a friend, and we became very good friends, and Jeff Kearney, Dan Cogdell, and some other very good lawyers. And I think that was so intense, such an intense experience, that it probably elevated my learning curve quite a bit, because the stakes were so high and the government was pouring so much, and by the way, resources into it, and I just really started concentrating, I think, on honing my craft. And again, that biggest takeaway was I got to be me. And fortunately, I didn't have to remake myself. Being myself sort of worked pretty well. I remember we got interviewed by the press a lot with the Branch Davidian case, and one of the most frequent questions I was asked is, spending all the time with these folks who are very religious, who dedicated their life to this religion and talk about it all the time and proselytize, did it ever affect you? Did it ever cause you to start thinking like they thought and become more religious? And I said, well, in one respect, yes. The press was following the trial. They were reporting just almost minute by minute what was going on. And every day when I'd walk up to that podium and start to question the witness, I'd look around and say, dear God, please don't let me mess this up.
Did, at some point you became active in the organization of Texas Criminal Defense Lawyers Association. What motivated that?
Well, at first, and again, I was very young, I guess, impressionable. I wanted to be president because all the good lawyers were president, and that was about the depth of it. And then as I started, getting closer to that, I started realizing there was more to it than that, and that the organization really did some important things for the practice of criminal defense for our clients, like the legislative effort, amicus effort, a lot of things that we did, and I started understanding there was a pretty good responsibility to be president. And then, I was president 20 years ago, and then I was the president of what then was the nonprofit Criminal Defense Lawyers Project, which ran the CLE, the use of grant funds given to us by the Court of Criminal Appeals to conduct CLE, and realized the importance of that. The primary goal, mission of that organization was to go out and do CLE in areas where it was not profitable to do them.
And by CLE, you're referring to seminars?
Yeah, seminars. Now, we would have seminars with 25 attendees, and they would be high quality speakers, because we didn't have to turn a profit. And I thought that was a very worthwhile thing to do. But I don't think it really dawned on me what someone can do with a position like that until I got involved with NACDL, and National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers. And I went to my first NACDL meeting, I want to say in 1987, and I can tell you without reservation that it never crossed my mind that I would eventually be president of NACDL. I looked around, I saw some of the best lawyers in the country. I listened to them debate issues at the board meetings. I looked at the wonderful work that they did, and I just thought this is the top of the top of legal talent. And then I eventually, someone suggested to me that I run for president. And I resisted that for a while because I didn't want the embarrassment of losing. And I finally did, and eventually was nominated and became president. But what really struck me about being president of ACDL is what kind of resources that I could have a hand in shaping and directing all the problems in the criminal justice system, access to counsel, bad forensic science, cash bail systems. We were in a position to try to do something about that. And I didn't have to be the guy that was litigating the cases on those issues because I wasn't the best to do that. Or I wasn't the guy that wrote the amicus brief for the Supreme Court. You know, the year I was president, we had 19 mentions in Supreme Court cases of our amicus briefs, second only to the ABA. And I couldn't do that, but what I could do was herd those cats in the same direction and set the direction to a large extent that the organization would go. And I really began to realize how important that is, that we fight hard for our clients. We do the best we can for each individual client, but we walk into court somewhat with a game already set. Rules of evidence, the statutory law, we can do something about that. We can change that. We can influence that with the power of an organization. We can stop families from being torn apart by somebody staying in jail for a year because they can't make a $1,000 bond. That's as important, I think, to me as a lawyer and as just a guy as going to court.
Let's flow back for a second to your actual practice. You were always a solo practitioner, is that right?
No, I had a couple of partnerships, 3 partnerships over the years.
And how large were those partnerships?
First one I had was 3, myself and 2 other partners, and then second partnership was 1 partner, eventually 3 or 2, and several associates over the years, and then down to 2 partners, and we had, I think maybe we had 3 associates at one point, so 5 lawyers.
That seems to be generally the rule with criminal defense lawyers, that they're either solo practitioners or very small firms. Why do you think that is?
You know, I can offer some guesses. I think one reason it is just the nature of the animal. I think that criminal defense lawyers are more maybe self-reliant than perhaps other types of lawyers. We really want to do everything ourselves. Also, just there's a practical issue about if you're in the same law firm and run into conflicts. You know, your partner gets called by the co-defendant first, and then you can't represent anybody else in the case.
In general, just describe your practice as it is right now. You're kind of at the peak of your career. What jurisdictions do you handle cases in? Generally, what kind of cases are you handling now?
I'm not turning anything away, but probably in the last, certainly 7 or 8 years, I usually have a few fairly large cases going that take the majority of my time, and then I have some of the run-of-the-mill stuff. Run-of-the-mill sounds kind of degrading. Some of the less serious offenses, let's say, that we all have had, DWIs, things like that. But I tried a case in October, November. It took me a month to try. It was very complex and took 2 months of solid preparation, and many months before that of preparation over that period of time, but doing nothing else for 2 months and then trying the case for a month. And then the cases I've tried in the last few years, probably more often than not, they involve some allegation of sexual misconduct, sometimes involving children, maybe often involving children. And the way I got into that, frankly, is there was a point in my practice where I saw that lawyers weren't trying that many cases. It was just the way things were going in the area the geographical area I was practicing in. The lawyers, the DA's office would make you a deal on ones where a deal ought to be made, and the ones that they wanted to go to trial on, most of the time, those were people that weren't able to afford to hire lawyers. So I saw that lawyers didn't want to try sexual assault and child cases. And I started talking around, saying, look, you got one of those cases, I'll try it, because I want to get in the courtroom. So I started trying those cases, and had some success, and started getting a few more of them, and have ended up trying, I don't remember how many I've tried, but several.
And those are all over the state.
Yeah.
Now, you tried some cases and handled cases in large cities and in small, very rural counties. Is there any difference in how you approach those cases and handle those?
Yeah, that's, I've tried cases, and I'm trying to think of the smallest case. I tried a case in Eastland where I think the entire county is about 3,500 people. And one of the people on the jury was my client's plumber. And there were several other people that knew my client and also knew the family of the alleged victim. And we realized early on that we weren't going to get a jury that didn't know some of the people involved. So we had to start calculating, well, how did they know them? How's that relationship likely to affect them? Because we all knew that they were probably going to say it won't affect me. So it was a real sort of family feel to the trial. It was really a jury of my client's peers, people that knew him, knew of him, and there were connections that ran deep. The court reporter was married to someone on the Court of Appeals. The prosecutor was married to someone on the Court of Appeals. The politics played very much, I think, into the client getting indicted. To start with, there were people who could influence things that happened in the DA's office. But one of my favorite stories about small towns, it's kind of old days, but I love telling this, is there was a time back during the Reagan administration where they were offering amnesty for undocumented aliens. And there were some conditions. You couldn't have more than 2 misdemeanors, was the one that's relevant to the story. And so there kind of word kind of went out, we need some people to represent undocumented aliens who have 2 misdemeanors, so we can bust one of them over the habeas corpus. So I got referred to a guy who had 2 DWIs in a small county. I think Pearsall was the county seat. It's been a while. And so I looked at them, and they were both uncounseled pleas. He just pled a doctor call. So I crafted just a dandy writ of habeas corpus attacking both of those convictions based on the 6th Amendment and 14th Amendment, any other amendment I thought was relevant. Fired it off to the clerk's office, and of course a copy of the county attorney, and guy called the county attorney, and he said, well, I got this document. He said, what is it you want? I said, well, I want to have a hearing and determine whether or not he was denied counsel. He said, no, what is it you want? Tell me what this is about. I said, well, he can't get citizenship if he has these 2 misdemeanors. He said, well, tell me about this fellow, this Mexican guy. And he said, whose ranch does he work on? I told him. He said, do you have kids? Do you have a wife? Yeah. How does he treat his wife? Has he ever been arrested for beating her up? No. If you talk to the guy who worked for, well, I will. Well, find out if he shows up for work. And so I did all that, talked to him, and he said, well, come on down. Maybe we can do something about it. So I rolled into Pearsall, and I've got my client and his brother, who's my interpreter, because I don't speak Spanish anywhere near well enough to do that. And so we sit down in court, and the court is conducted in Spanish. The judge is speaking Spanish, the prosecutor is speaking Spanish, the defendants are all speaking Spanish. And I'm looking around wondering what's going on. And my interpreter says, I got to go feed the parking meter. And of course, what happened was he gets up to feed the parking meter, and they call my case. So we sit down, and the judge starts speaking in Spanish, the prosecutor starts speaking in Spanish, and then the judge turns to my client and starts speaking to him in Spanish. And I said, whoa, wait a minute. And I swear this happened. Bailiff puts his hand on my shoulder and says, son, if I were you, I'd be quiet, you're winning. And so he granted the writ, and I got out of the courtroom, and I asked through my interpreter, what was the judge talking about? He said, well, he wanted to know what ranch I worked on, whether I was married, whether I had any kids, whether I showed up for work or not. And I told him yes, and he said, well, it's okay with me if you're a citizen, and he granted the writ.
Sounds like justice was done.
Yeah.
You have kind of an unusual arrangement in the sense that you are married to a successful criminal defense lawyer. What's her name?
Suzanne.
What's her last name?
Spencer.
And how long have y'all been married now?
Been married 20 years.
And y'all actually office together, is that right?
We do.
How is it that you and Suzanne have been able to practice law together, live together in a successful marriage, and not kill each other?
Well, it's like I tell juries. She helps me pick juries. I always introduce her as a very fine lawyer, happens to be my wife. And I said, one thing about having two lawyers, you don't argue a lot because neither one wants to get the other one started. And but we made a deal early on that, as she puts it, I was going to steal from the rich and she was going to give to the poor. And her background, she has a master's in social work, and her first career was as a social worker. She's fluent in Spanish. She's Hispanic. She grew up in South Texas.
What was her maiden name?
It's Spencer. She has three of her grandparents are from Mexico, and her has an Anglo grandfathers where she got her name. And so her practice is primarily assigned counsel, primarily Spanish speakers, and a large percent of them are Spanish speakers with mental health issues. And so the way we work our overhead is, of course, we very deferential to understanding the type of practice she has and provide a lot of overhead on that, which I'm happy to do. And that's the way together that I think we service that segment of the clientele. And it's something I'm very proud of her. You know, I step into her world every now and then, and I get out really quickly because I don't have the skills to do what she does. I can't deal with the very difficult clients with mental issues that she does, and she's very, very talented.
What do you see being the primary problems that need to be addressed in our criminal justice system here in the year 2017?
First and foremost, access to counsel. One thing that I learned in my years in the ACDL, and certainly as president, is there are places in this country, for instance, one place we monitored, South Carolina, where there was no lawyer anywhere in the criminal justice system involved with these cases where people could get jail time. The judge was not a lawyer. The prosecutor was the arresting officer and would meet with the client and sometimes out in the parking lot and cut deals. And that was just fine with everybody. That's the way to just run these on through. And that's just one example. All across the country, there are situations like that. Can you imagine what the difference it would make if every defendant facing jail time in the criminal justice system had a competent lawyer? Somebody to point out that, well, if you plead on that theft case for back time, you're going to be deported, or you're never going to be able to work at a particular type of job, or if you plead to that drug case for back time, your family is going to be removed from Section 8 housing, and on with collateral consequences. Can you imagine how it would be if everybody had a lawyer at the initial stage trying to get them out of jail before they lose their job, before their kids and wife go on welfare because or husband go on welfare because the breadwinner's out of the home. It's a shame. You read Gideon versus Wainwright, and it's some of the most wonderful language you can imagine in a Supreme Court decision, and it is gone literally nowhere. It really is a shame to call it the promise of Gideon. At most, it was a suggestion of Gideon when it's come down. And to me, that's the biggest problem with the criminal justice system, followed closely by Cash Brandon.
You've been involved in Travis County the last couple of years in the creation of a new approach trying to remedy some of the problems with the appointed council system there. Can you give us a brief description of what the original problem, how it was working in Travis County that instigated the changes that have been made and what those changes are and whether or not that's helped?
Well, a real brief general description of the previous system was that the judges controlled who got appointed to cases. There was a system that developed over the years where it was more or less a rotating basis, but that really wasn't stuck to. With some courts especially, they would make bench appointments, just appoint somebody that they favored for one reason or the other. There was really no supervision of those lawyers, no quality control. To remove someone from the ability to take appointments was up to the judges. There was a lot of political pressure on the judges. They didn't want to deal with that. And the result of it was basically it was an unsupervised system. What the new system brought is basically a nonprofit organization that is funded by the county and by the state. And all the lawyers that want assigned counsel work, in effect, become vendors of that system, of that nonprofit. There's a body that within the nonprofit that takes applications, reviews the qualifications of the lawyers. Somewhat, to some extent, the qualifications are set by statute or by rule. Some of them are set, or some of them are up to the discretion of the committee. And we've tried to impose some standards, both with education, practice standards, and just general standards of conduct. Also, that organization has leadership staff who encourage the lawyers to get private investigators, retain experts. There's funding for that. The number of experts and private investigators that have been requested just went up exponentially for the first few months that the system was in place, and the number of dismissals went up proportionally. There's no question in my mind at this point that the quality of representation has improved. The big disappointment is that the funding authority for indigent defense in general still views lawyers representing indigent defendants as sort of a labor of love, sort of a noblesse oblige duty, and that's an outdated view. It needs to be a profession. It needs to be compensated as a profession. There needs to be the encouragement financially, professionally, through the rules that we talked about, to treat those cases with the same degree of professionalism and effort as any other case in the criminal justice system.
It's kind of a final thought. You spent the last 40 years being a criminal defense lawyer. Has it been a good choice?
Yeah, it's been a good choice. It's really the only choice. I talked early on about that gene in us all somewhere that I think causes us to do this. I think maybe that same gene disqualifies us from doing a lot of other things. And I don't know what else I would have done. I can't think of anything I could have done that suits me as well as this. You know, it's more to do this.